Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Leslie Richardson,
And I'm your co host, Robert Green.
and we are joined by Erik Jensen, who is a regular on this show talking about SQL stuff. So, hi Eric.
Hi, thanks for having me one more time.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. We've done a number of episodes on your excellent extensions for working with SQL Server, SQLite, Entity Framework Core. Um, and it's been a while, and you noticed that some of the videos might have disappeared or not as easy to get to as they were in the past. So we thought we would revisit the SQLite Toolbox extension. And if you'll talk about what it does, we'll also talk about some of the new stuff. And we'll make sure in the notes to let people know when we're just reviewing what they may have already seen or we're talking about new stuff. So if you're fully familiar with this and you just want to see what's new, it'll be easy to get to that part of the video. Although why you would want to skip over Eric's demos, I have no idea.
That's awful. Don't do that.
No. So yeah. So yes, we're talking about SQLite, and you may not all know what that is. It's standalone database engine that's basically just a piece of C# code. So it can be embedded in any application and use a local database on your disk. And the SQLite is maintained not by Microsoft, but by the SQLite organization, which is a group of developers offering services in the area of SQLite and evolving SQLite. So it's completely open source and it runs on basically every operating system in the world. And I think it has quite a long story behind it, maybe like, I don't know, 15, 20 years old. So it's probably here to stay. And it can run on anything from embedded devices to Windows and the Linux servers and workstations.
It works very well for mobile apps. I've used it often with my
It's
children
it's
and
it's
Howie app.
part of the OS
Yeah.
on all mobile platforms, Android and iOS, and it's used by many applications for storing, yeah, like whatever data they need to store locally. So it's locally available and also available if you happen to be offline for a while. So they also offer in the .NET universe. They offer a ADO.NET provider called System Data SQLite, and that is actually what the tool I'm going to show is based on. There is another provider maintained by the EF Core team called Microsoft Data SQLite. It's a more modern, slightly more lightweight and more faithful to the SQLite type system driver than this one, which pretends to know about a lot of different types that are actually not part of the database engine. We'll get into what types are actually in SQLite once we have a look at how to create tables and so on inside the extension. And the extension we're talking about is SQL. Uh, the URL for it is actually SQL C Toolbox. That's basically for historical reasons because it also supports a different database engine. We will not say anything about that today. It's open source and on GitHub, and it's a standard standard Visual Studio extension that you can install in Visual Studio. I think it's like 20, 2019 and 2022 anyway. Definitely 2022. And I have also made experimental SQL Server Management Studio 21, which is currently in preview. I can also support that. So that was just like an interesting exercise in extensibility for Management Studio. It's available from from the Visual Studio Marketplace, and for the Management Studio extension, you actually have to install that manually by copying files across. So it is what it is, but it actually works nonetheless. I also have some standalone desktop apps, WPF apps that you can run and get more or less similar functionality. and I have related command line tools and libraries that does some of the functionality that we're going to see today. So if you want to automate what you're seeing today, it's possible with my command line tools and NuGet libraries.
Awesome. I feel like we talked about specifically EF or Entity Framework Core Power Tools before at
Yes, we did.
some
I
round of
think not
didn't we?
so
Yeah.
long ago, and I'm not going to talk about that. That's another extension I maintain. Originally, EF Core Power Tools used to be a corner of this extension, and that's why there's this paragraph here about that it has moved because I decided to make that a separate extension, which in the meantime has become quite popular. So
Cool.
yes. But this is a SQLite toolbox, and it's available on Visual Studio Marketplace and on Visual Studio Extension Manager. For some reason, it has 1.4 or over 1.4 million installs, and I think installs means, correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie and Robert, that means actually that it's installed and in operation by 1.4 million
Mhm.
developers, or at least Visual Studio SKUs.
No, I'm responsible for at least 10 of those over time, so I'm
Yeah,
very
exactly. So
That's
yeah, so that's probably. But I
doing pretty
think
well for
most
itself.
most developers probably just have one or two SKUs in operation. So it's a frightening number of users, really.
Yeah. I mean, if you count us internal folk who all have like 5 builds each minimum,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
that's where
But
the
that's.
influx.
But I think
There's some duplication,
I
but
don't
maybe
think you
not
represent
huge.
the standard
Probably not. But
developer
Mhm.
somehow. Yes.
Yeah.
So
but that's cool. I mean, look at y'all 5-star rating too. Like
yes,
Yeah.
seems like you're
highly
doing pretty
rated and
good.
humongous number of installs. I don't really get it, but yes. So
Something's working.
this extension as is very mature. It was first released for Visual Studio 2010, and I still so I as I said here, if you need a Visual Studio 2010 version, very few people luckily need do that these days. You can actually get one, and it I can see it supports also 2017. I'm probably going to stop doing that soon, but nonetheless, it does at the moment. So we'll go through the demo, and
Yeah, let's see it in
to
action.
acquire this, you actually just need to go to Extension Manager in Visual Studio. So under Extensions, manage extensions, and since it's such a popular extension, it will probably blow right out at your eyes once you go in here. Yeah,
There it is.
like yes, I have it installed already, but there it is. So I think that's probably also why so many people have it. They go in here and then this that looks good. It's free. Let's install it. I don't know. If you're using SQLite, if you're working with embedded databases, if you're working with SQL Server and want to move data in and out of SQL Server into SQLite, this is a tool you want to use, and it all runs inside your Visual Studio environment and keeps you focused on what you're doing inside Visual Studio, where you maybe some of you spend a lot of time of your time each day. I know I certainly do. And I have launched the toolbox here on the right. So what happens when you first launch the SQL Server Compact Toolbox? You can launch it from the tools menu, and it's listed here. If you go to Server Explorer, oh, sorry, let me just, it's acting funny here. If you go to Server Explorer, yeah, there's actually also an icon to launch it here. So now we have it launched, and now we have Server Explorer launched as well. It starts by listing the connections that I have in Server Explorer, and you may ask use my SQL Server connections from Server Explorer, and you may ask yourself, what value does that add? It's not. I want to work with SQLite. I don't want to work with SQL Server. But that's because once you have those connections available, there's actually some things you can do with those SQL Server databases. For example, you can script it. So you can script it in a You can generate scripts from the database, both data and schema. Data meaning insert statements that actually populates the table, and schema means create table, create index, create view statements, and so on. And a syntax that's compatible with SQLite. And that is taken even further, like migrate to SQLite works for some type of objects some of the time, because SQL Server keeps introducing new data types and things that are not really supported by SQLite, but it will get you your base tables and the data migrated to a SQLite database. So if you have something and say, now I don't want to have the additional overhead of installing a SQL Server on my customer's machine. Even a SQL Express edition, it requires admin access and so on. I just want a local file-based database. But if your starting point is an existing SQL Server database, this is a way to get started by migrating your schema, your table definitions and indexes, and your data into a SQLite database. So now we don't have any SQLite databases listed here. So in order to add some, we can start by creating brand new database. So we just click on Add SQLite connection and create a database. Click the Create button. I'm just going to call it demo.db and click Save and Close. So this has now created an empty database for me in this folder that I picked before. Pretty random folder. Never mind. But now, of course, it doesn't contain anything because we have not created anything inside it. In order to create something inside it, we can run a query and then run a create table statement if we know how to do that. But we can also use my build table feature, which is this little form here that allows you to create your tables with help from this grid. So it's suggesting that we should have a column called ID and with a data type of integer. So for a SQLite, you actually have a limited number of data types available, the ones that are listed here. That's just how SQLite is. So if you want to store things like dates and GUIDs, you basically have to store them as text and then just stick to a good way of standardizing on how you are serializing dates and GUIDs. So let's add another column. Call it
I do
text.
like that you can build this table in an interface like this instead of having to necessarily
Absolutely, because I can
okay,
never
okay.
remember the create table statement,
Yeah.
and I always mix it up with SQL Server or something like
Yep.
that. So it's and then if we add text, it's actually proposing that we should go for a length of 100. That's probably fine, and it should not be a primary key. So and then we can create a script to actually create the create table statement. This doesn't actually create the table for us, but it creates a script. And so that's also like a little bit of learning here. Oh, this is a syntax that I actually should be using in this case in order to create this table. And then we get a query editor window. If you have worked with tools like the VS Code MS SQL extension, I was almost going to mention Azure Data Studio, but I won't. And SQL Server Management Studio, obviously, then this will look very familiar. Even in Visual Studio, there's a SQL Server data tools, which also has a query pane that is somewhat similar to what you're seeing here.
Mhm.
If we press execute, we can now see that 0 rows affected basically means that we didn't really select anything, but at least we executed something, and we can see that the test table appearing here on the right. And if we expand it, we get some information about the columns on that table. And I think we should also be able to see the primary key, PK test primary key constraint.
How often do you create a database manually like this versus
Uh,
part of an
not
application?
often. Actually, not very often. So
Because
that's the advantage of having this migrate feature, because you might have some existing database with a usable schema that you can basically piggyback on already.
Or you can add Entity Framework Core, create the database for you from your
Yeah,
object classes, right?
true. And then just
Okay.
hook into the DB file from that and can
Okay.
do it. Yeah, definitely both those options are valid. So
Cool.
probably not so often will you be starting by just raw create table statements. Can happen.
Right. Yeah, so it's nice to not have to remember all the
Yeah, so
mechanics of
there's a little bit
creating
of
that.
help here with actually understanding the syntax. So now we could start also creating insert statements, but I have for this demo, I have actually managed to get hold of some good existing databases that I found out there. So if we go to browse and I go to my
So, I
downloads
I
folder,
noticed that there were 3 options. One was the one you just opened, which is add SQLite connection, but there's
yeah,
another 2 that were like add SQLite server connections, 3.5 and I think
yeah,
4.0.
we can, yeah, we can. Not, right now I'm adding just a SQLite connection to an existing database, which I downloaded from somewhere, and it's called Northwind DB, a very well-known demo database from Microsoft. I think it actually started in Microsoft Access. So there's add SQLite connection. There's add SQL CE connection, this other database engine that we're not going to talk about today. And then you can also add a SQL Server connection. It will basically do the same thing as a Server Explorer is doing, like adding a SQL Server connection. But maybe you just want to stay in here and focus here, so you can actually do that from in here as well. And then there's a number of options you can set. Like, for example, I actually don't want to see these SQL Server connections here in my view here. So you can go into the options here and say get databases from SSMS Object Explorer. No, I don't actually. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get those databases shown here at all. And it can actually also take, so if I think we're actually in some solution now I have a solution open that is something to do with testing of SQLite databases incidentally, and I can actually click a button here and say add SQLite connections from current solution. It will scan the solution and try to connect to all the things that look like they could be SQLite databases in here, and put them into this data connections container here on the left. I won't do that because that will pollute my screen with many databases. Can do it later.
Like, check 'em all out.
Um, yeah. So I'm going to look at closer at the Northwind database. It's like a supplier of food, supplier, I think, of supplier database with customers, products, suppliers. So let's have a closer look at the products, for example. So here again, we can create a new table if we want. And then if I right click an actual table, I get this huge context menu with a lot of things I can do in relation to that particular table, the products table. So for example, I can edit the top 200 rows, which gives me a whoa.
Yeah.
uh,
Not exactly
After
zippy.
a while, it will give me wow, interesting. Maybe it's just because I'm screen sharing. I hope so.
That's true. My
Yeah.
performance always tanks
Yeah.
anytime my screen
Yeah,
share.
so this will actually give me a kind of a grid where I can start editing data because the product ID, the primary key is actually grayed out. I can't change that, but I can change all the other columns in this database table simply by editing the grid, and I can use these buttons to save and add, delete rows and navigate back and forth and so on. I think I can even write some SQL to filter what I'm seeing on the screen. If I have many rows in front of me, I can kind of filter so I can focus on some subset of the entire grid. But I'm actually able to edit it at this point.
Also, but you can manually edit specific pieces of data.
You can manually edit specific columns and specific cells in your table. if you want. So that's one way to work with this products table. Um, the other is that you can basically just create a new query, which is focusing on this particular database, and I can create the query myself by typing it. But I have also some shorthand script options here that will paste a pre-selected query for this table into the query editor. So, for example, here it creates a select statement with all the columns, and we can run that. And the result will be shown down here. If we there's various options for how the results are shown. I know it's a little bit mumbo jumbo now. On the other hand, it's fast. That's the default behavior. It's really really fast, but maybe not super readable. Then you can actually choose various types of grids to view the results in. So we start with a classic, so-called classic grid. Again, the more advanced the grid gets, the more performance challenge you get. But I think you get things like you can on this grid you can like sort the individual columns up and down. Probably not so interesting on supply ID, but at least the product name is it's nice to be able to sort on that. These 77 rows. And you cannot do any editing here, but you can actually kind of navigate and sort it a little bit. Then there is another grid, which is not the classic grid. So this is a little more advanced, and it will actually allow you to do groupings and filtering on each column. So, for example, we can group by supplier ID. So now we get like nested grids that for each supplier we get the products that this supplier supplies. And then we can also do filtering on the columns. So we can do like a search for particular things, just like Excel filtering, so to speak. So we can always say we only want to look at a particular category, number 6 or whatever. So it will only show for each supplier their products in category number 6, whatever that means. We could also have made a join, so we could join to the category table to actually understand what category ID means. I hope you get the drift. This is quite an advanced way of, or a more advanced way of exploring the data in your table than just looking at it as a plain grid.
But this is great because I mean, it's
Cool.
all in VS. Obviously, you don't have to go over
You
to
don't
like
have
a
to go
separate
anywhere.
software.
No, 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 no.
Yeah.
You don't have to. Yeah, and all these grids are sort of based on free or open source stuff that I've amassed over the time from out there. So yeah, it's a good opportunity to be able to explore your data in a little more advanced way than just looking at it as a plain grid. So we click here, everything will go back to just showing in a grid, and of course we are still filtering. So the filter is still there, and you can see it's indicated with this funnel thing here. So we can just click clear filter, and we should get back to where we started before we started playing with the grid.
Cool.
Yeah. So I have various also helpers for creating the SQL for adding columns and adding indexes and so on. If you want to do that, you can use these helpers to build the index and specify test index, specify which column you want the index to be on, and then should the index be unique? Probably not. And then just get a script in order to actually create the index. And then obviously we can add more columns to the index if we want to, and so on. So that's again like a shortcut to understanding the underlying SQL syntax, or a kind of a helper to understand the underlying SQL syntax. I'm not actually creating the index, but I'm creating the script to create the index, which we can then execute here. I think there's also various options to export the results from the grids as Excel and stuff like that. So for a SQLite database, there can be some housekeeping things you need to do, and also maybe you should consider something about it's really nice and portable, but can you use this for terabyte big databases? You probably shouldn't, because having a SQLite database requires some maintenance. And there's two maintenance concepts, which is vacuum and re-indexing. So vacuum is actually removing bits inside the SQLite database where that for representing data that has been deleted, and re-index is rebuilding the indexes that can get fragmented.
Wait, say
So
again. What does the vacuum do?
vacuum, if you're deleting stuff, it's actually not physically deleted. It's just marked
Ah,
as deleted inside the database file.
okay.
And so in order to shrink the physical size of the database file, you have to do a vacuum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you have to come with your vacuum cleaner and clean out the dead bits, and then that will shrink the size of the physical file.
Mm-hmm.
I just recently, like this week, read about somebody that has a SQLite database of 6 terabytes. I would not recommend anybody do that, but
The option is
but
there.
it yes,
So,
but apparently it's technically possible. So the
so how
it's like
do you back up that? Is that a manual
yes,
backup
because
because it's just
yeah,
a file?
yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah, no, it's just one file. So yeah, how
can be done.
yeah.
I assume it's not running on a mobile device though.
I think it's running on some website, but yeah, it was an interesting read. Let me put it like that. So yeah,
Well, it's nice to know you can do that. It's nice to know there's
you
no
can. It's possible.
practical
Yes,
limit to
exactly,
what you can do.
exactly. We can also create a database graph. Let's see what happens and if it actually works. Yeah, it does. So we'll see demo. So it will ask us for a file name, and hopefully, eventually, it will actually create an interactive graph of the database, showing how the. We should probably just make this slightly bigger here, showing how the tables are interconnected with the foreign keys. So the order details point to the orders and the products, and the orders point to customers, shippers, and employees, and so on. And if you click this expand button here, you get a list of all the columns inside the order details tables. This is using something called directed graph markup language, and you have to install an additional component which is part of Visual Studio called a DGML viewer in order to view these graphs. I'm not sure
I
is
just did that on a database, and all I see is the XML.
yeah, you need that. And I think one of the challenges is that this component is like you have to pick that component. It's not part of any of the so-called workloads. So you have to go to into the installer and pick DGML viewer. And I've just discovered, because I was doing some work in enabling some ARM64 stuff, that it's actually until recently it was not available on ARM64 Visual Studio, but apparently it has just silently, without a big hurrah, become available in ARM64 as well, which is really
Oh,
nice.
yeah. So just for the benefit of the viewers, can you go
Yes.
into the installer and show where that is?
I can try.
I can show you how to get there because I just did it.
Yeah.
So go to the installer.
Yeah, but it's just so slow now. Yeah.
Or
I
I can
think it
show it
must be
on my
because I'm
screen.
screen
You're
sharing.
to show it. Ah, there we go. So if you go to individual components and
Mm-hmm.
then type DGML, here's the editor which you need to select and install. Because if you
Exactly.
don't, all you see is XML.
Correct, because behind the scenes, this is just an XML file.
Yep.
So this is something you can use for documentation, designing your database, changing your design. You can actually interact with these XML files and edit them, and you can also share them if you download a DGML Power Tools or something it's called, then you can actually share them as PNG and SVD files. There are also solutions that are more cross-platform these days for creating entity relationship diagrams, but I've actually never got that added to SQL Server Compact Toolbox for some reason. There you can also use something called Mermaid entity relations. It's entity relationship diagrams to diagram your database, and I have tools for doing that in EF Core Power Tools, not here.
Cool.
That's
So,
yeah.
what are the newest things you've added?
To be perfectly honest, Robert, it's really, really a long time ago since I added
Okay.
anything to this. I mean, despite the fact that we have potentially many daily users of this tool, I don't hear anything. I don't take that as crickets. I take that as a good sign, actually, that this is mature software.
Mhm.
It's 15 years old. I have to go into the code base, and it can be a little bit painful to look at, but I'm reluctant to change too much because apparently it just works.
Sweet. I mean, if it ain't broke.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, when you showed the GitHub page, I noticed that there was, of course, you, and then there were other contributors. So, talk a little bit about how you use other contributors on an extension like this.
Usually somebody has some brilliant idea, and they create an issue on GitHub where I host my source code and my issues, and we start a discussion. And if that person is really burning for this, sometimes they also feel capable enough to actually dive into some good old .NET Framework code and try to implement this feature. And that's what these contributors do often with my guidance, or we do, of course, discuss how should it be designed, depending on what type of size and type of feature it is. Can be anything from small things to huge things. So we discuss a design, and then I guide them through getting it done, so they feel like ownership to it. And of course, they create what is called a pull request, which is something you do on GitHub, meaning that I I have this piece. This I would like this change to the code to go into the main branch in
Mhm.
this repository, and then we can have a dialogue about the change and the back and forth, and adjust and make sure there's some test coverage and some smoke testing, etc. And once we both agree that things are the way it should be, I can actually approve the pull request, and then it becomes available in the next release. And I have like mechanism that's automatically whenever things are merged into master branch, I have a pipeline, which is like an automated process that can build the software for me. But it can actually also publish the latest version of the software, so it will increment the version of the software to the next version, and then it will publish that version to not to Marketplace, but something that looks like Visual Studio Marketplace. It's a little place on the internet called visexgallery.com. It's actually maintained by a certain Mads Christensen. He's been kind enough to actually make this available to extension developers, so people can go there and interact with it more or less like they do with Marketplace. So they can at least download the Visex file from there and install it on their own system and verify that the change they made is working as expected also in the release software. Once in a while, I actually release a new version of my extension. Frequently, I release a new EF Core Power Tools because there's always a new .NET every month. So
Right.
that and there's always a lot of dependencies that are updated also every month, more or less. But for this extension, not so much. And my experience have been mixed recently because whatever little thing I think I do to improve it, I will potentially just make somebody not very upset, but maybe just a little bit upset
Oh, yeah.
because I broke something for them. I try to sort of step back and think, okay, this is so small and this is just an improvement. Nobody will care.
Yes, nothing wrong with having mature software.
Yeah. So that's like, yeah, it's an interesting kind of mature software, but then it kind of grinds to a halt, and then you have to start from scratch with something else, because then you can do your breaking changes all the time, and nobody will say who moved my cheese.
Okay. That is awesome. Thanks for coming on the show and showing this to us again.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I could see why it's such a popular extension, definitely. And
Yeah.
it is so polished in its current state that,
Very, very useful.
and yeah, super useful. I love that it's integrated into BS. You don't have to leave to another
You have to
sandbox to
jump
experiment.
anywhere
Yeah.
else. No.
So, yeah, we're going to include links obviously to this extension so people can access it if they aren't using it already. It seems like a lot of people are. So give a
Yeah,
shout out if you're
apparently.
using the
Yeah.
extension. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some people out there not using it, but maybe they don't need it.
Well, they'll need it now after this.
Well, even if they're
Absolutely.
using it, they've probably seen something that they didn't know was in it. I think I did. So
Maybe,
I'm
yeah,
sure they did as
maybe,
well.
yeah. Yeah, there's a
Great.
lot of buttons you can press and find new features. So yeah.
Yep.
Well, Eric, thank you so much. And I'm sure this won't be the last we see of you on this channel. So, yeah, thank you for
Hopefully
sharing.
not.
Yeah, and thanks to all the viewers for watching. If you're not already using the SQLite extension for Visual Studio for some reason, like go check it out, especially if SQLite is your database method of choice.
Yep.
And yeah, till next time, happy coding, y'all.